Welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, coming to you solo this week. Co-host Justin Lowry unable to join me because of our schedules not aligning, but that's okay. We'll trek on without him, as plenty to talk about this week. And really, I feel like that's going to be a recurring theme throughout the next 6 weeks or so, because WWE's schedule is just super packed with events, and in my opinion, it's too much. We just finished up the Super Showdown over in Melbourne, Australia, that took place Saturday. And if you're in the United States, very early Saturday morning, 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Did not have an opportunity to see it. That is on my to-do list down the road, but I think I'm probably in the same boat as a lot of fans who weren't able to get up, obviously, to watch it live. And then I got caught up with Raw and Smackdown before I was able to get to it. So won't speak real specifically about that event, but that was a big event for WWE. They really spent a lot of time promoting that, and now they're spending time promoting Crown Jewel, which is upcoming early November. Before we get to that, however, there's still the first ever all-women's pay-per-view Evolution, which really has been, I think, the forgotten about event. Really very little time dedicated to that, and it did change a little bit this week, as we'll get to. Both with Raw and Smackdown focusing on some big matches that'll take place. But there's also the Mae Young Classic. There is also the Mixed Match Challenge. SmackDown 1000 next week, just at this point now 5 days away. So there's so many different things to focus on that it seems like it's almost too much for a casual fan to keep track of all of that. Even some of the hardcore fans having a hard time juggling everything. Well, WWE decided to add even more to that, as next week, WWE's newest promotion, NXT UK, will begin airing on the network as well. So that's something that Justin and I will talk about in the weeks and months to come. But I kind of want to focus on the biggest takeaways from the Super Showdown and Raw and SmackDown. And I think the biggest one was something that had been speculated for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month now. And it's now come to fruition, the return of Shawn Michaels as an in-ring competitor. It was formally announced on Monday when he and Triple H kicked off the show. And Triple H basically said, "Are you ready?" channeling their DX from literally 20 years ago at this point. And that kind of puts in perspective how long these guys have been around. For Shawn Michaels, he started in the company in the late 80s. And, he retired about 7-8 years ago, and I think he went out in a way that very few professional wrestlers can. He went out on his own terms, not a shell of his former self. He went out as a great in-ring competitor. I think he left before his body broke down too significantly. Of course, he did have some pretty serious injuries earlier in his career that caused basically a 4+ year sabbatical. But Michaels, after he lost to The Undertaker at WrestleMania, announced his retirement. We thought it was going to be for good. He has stayed out of the ring for all this time, and now all of a sudden it's changing. And to me, sort of mixed emotions. I thought it was actually refreshing to see someone truly be retired from professional wrestling and not make one of those comebacks 6 months later, a year later, like we've seen time and time again. My belief, and certainly some speculation, is that Shawn Michaels was basically given an offer he could not refuse. And this is prompted by how much money WWE gets from wrestling those shows in Saudi Arabia. Just absurd amount of money. Maybe Vince McMahon came to Shawn Michaels and said $5-10 million to come back and wrestle a match or two. And you can certainly understand why Michaels would, be prompted to accept that. But from the other side of it, as a fan of his, watching most of his career, I thought he went out the best way possible. And I don't want to see a broken down Shawn Michaels well past his prime try to work with 3 other guys that I think are sort of in that same mold. Triple H can still go, but obviously not on a full-time regular schedule. Undertaker has looked very, very shaky for 4 or 5 years at this point. And Kane is serviceable for the most part, but again, he's a guy that can't wrestle full-time, and when he tried his most recent comeback in July, it was cut short because of injury. So we are now getting that tag team match. It'll be DX, if you will, Triple H and Shawn Michaels against the Brothers of Destruction at Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia. And it feels like if Shawn Michaels was going to come back for anything, it should have been at WrestleMania. But again, the money talks, and I think that's the reason why he'll be wrestling this show. And it seems like this Crown Jewel is really about bringing back the big names and the old stars from generations past, if you will. So Michaels will be back in the ring. Hopefully he has a good showing. I don't know if you can really judge too much from this match because, again, he's working with 3 other guys that are not regular full-time competitors. As well, the other question is, will this be a one-off or will it lead to Shawn Michaels wrestling a couple more matches? I know people have always speculated, what would it be like to see him against his former student Daniel Bryan or him against AJ Styles, which unfortunately we never got the opportunity to see because Styles was in other companies while Michaels was wrestling in his second stint. Or even a relative newcomer in terms of at least how long Shawn Michaels has been around, Seth Rollins, a guy that many think could be the best in-ring performer in the company today. Maybe those matches will come to fruition. Maybe Shawn Michaels will have another WrestleMania match. But for a guy named Mr. WrestleMania, it feels like a disservice to not have his return match at WrestleMania. But again, that's just the reality of how this company works now with really the money dictating how they book their programming. I mentioned a little bit earlier the lack of build towards Evolution, but I think there was some significant developments in that regard on Monday Night Raw. And the one that I think was somewhat expected was that Ronda Rousey and Nikki Bella would start to build towards their match. That's been rumored for a while now that would be the Raw Women's Championship title contest. Maybe a little surprising. It wasn't something that caught me necessarily off guard, but Nikki and Brie turned heel on Ronda Rousey after they had teamed up successfully in Australia. They have another tag match on Raw. They beat the Riot Squad, but afterwards Nikki and Brie, while seemingly celebrating with Ronda, attack her. I think this makes sense, and it makes sense because especially with the issues that we've seen from Brie Bella in particular, the fans, I think, a little bit were turning on the Bellas. Yes, the Bellas are still popular amongst the women in the crowd for the most part, maybe some of the younger fans. Of course, they have a good following because of their reality TV exploits, in particular Total Bellas and Total Divas. But, I think a lot of the hardcore wrestling fans aren't fans of the Bellas, and you can understand why. And so it makes sense to present them as heels. I think they will get a good heel reaction. What they're going to do with Brie in particular, I don't know, because there's been speculation that maybe she'll have her own match at Evolution. Maybe they'll simply just use her to be with Nikki in this feud and sort of stack the deck as a 2-on-1. I think that's probably more likely the outcome. But now you know what you're going to have on the Raw side main eventing. It's going to be Ronda Rousey against Nikki Bella. And I think the fact that they made Nikki a full-fledged heel is a lot better than if they had gone with the face versus face type of match. I think this will work a lot better. And I could see, if the Bellas do stick around past this pay-per-view, which they very easily could, I think it makes more sense for them to work as heels anyway. Something else that we saw in terms of a heel turn on Raw, it was a pretty action-packed show. There was returns, and we'll get to another one of those shortly. There's also a couple heel turns. Not only the Bellas, but this one's surprising, especially in how it was pulled off. Bobby Lashley is now a heel as he and Lio Rush teamed up, in a sense, to take out Kevin Owens. And this was sort of kill 2 birds with 1 stone type of deal, as Kevin Owens legitimately was injured. He needed to take some time off to have surgery. I believe he's going to be out upwards of 4 to 6 months. So this is going to be a long-term absence for Kevin Owens. So they wanted to write him off of television. It's a little bit harder to do that sometimes with a heel than as a face, because typically when you're a face, if you're injured, you get attacked by the heel that you're feuding with. That's just, wrestling 101. They went that same route, but they kind of had to flip the roles here. Kevin Owens had been the heel. He'd been teaming with Elias, and those two were tremendously entertaining as a duo in recent weeks. Unfortunate that seemingly will be cut premature. But Lashley was a face that really was never fully getting over with the audience since his return the night after WrestleMania. He had some good moments, but I think overall it was disappointing. He just wasn't connecting with the fans. He was put into segments that he really seemed uncomfortable with, first with Sami Zayn, then with Elias. They put Lio Rush by his side in large part to sort of serve as his mouthpiece to bring some personality to Bobby Lashley and make him a little bit more interesting. I think that that's worked, but I think Lio Rush is a guy that he's sort of an Enzo Amore, where he's a loudmouth, he's constantly yapping. And what they did with him on Raw was really, get the audience to turn against Lio, and as a result, Bobby. It worked. The fans were cheering for Kevin Owens, who's always sort of a likable heel anyway, just because he's very comical and animated. So they did, in a sense, a double turn in which Bobby Lashley became the heel. He attacked Kevin Owens after the match, which Lashley won, and the injured Kevin Owens was left beaten and severely injured. As I mentioned, he's going to take time off due to a real-life injury, so it made sense. Now the question, of course, in the future is, does Kevin Owens come back as a face as a result of this, or do they kind of go back to the tried and true Kevin Owens as a heel formula? Because remember, he has been a heel the entire time, pretty much. He's been in WWE's, basically the company, because in NXT he debuted as a face and later that same night turned heel on Sami Zayn. He's been a heel ever since. So I think he's a guy they know can succeed as a heel. We'll see if they give him a face run when he comes back, but that's down the road. In the meantime, Bobby Lashley, maybe some renewed life with him and his character, now with a sidekick in Lio, now with a heel persona. So we'll see if that helps Bobby Lashley going forward. At least I think it was the right decision to try and see, and I'd like this to be done with some other guys like Bobby Roode, so on and so forth. But at least they made the right decision here, I think, with Lashley. I mentioned that it was a night of surprising twists and turns, and that included not only the return of Shawn Michaels, but the return of someone who was an adversary to Michaels many times over the years, Kurt Angle. And Kurt Angle did this in a very unique and sneaky manner, if you will. I thought it was, pretty creative. Kurt Angle had been off TV for a little over a month because he was on vacation, per the edict of Stephanie McMahon. Baron Corbin had taken over, filling in short term. Well, Corbin has sort of been out of control with power. That's been the storyline there, putting himself in Universal title matches. He basically set up a battle royal in which he was going against nobodies. He pretty much set it up for Corbin to win and move on to the Crown Jewel World Cup, which not going to spend much time with that, but that in itself is just already seeming like it's a disaster. Nonetheless, that's upcoming next month, so they had qualifying matches on Raw. John Cena was already in because John Cena doesn't have to qualify, apparently. But this second, I guess really the first match to determine who else would be the second participant in the World Cup. It was a battle royal from all across the world, according to Corbin, where he brought, jokes dressed up as, a Polish fighter or a Russian or whatever. Well, one of the competitors, as you might have already seen, was a conquistador, completely covered head to toe with a gold outfit, including a mask. And after Corbin made short work of everyone else, the conquistador was outside the ring but had not been eliminated, comes in out of nowhere, catches Corbin with some suplexes and a very familiar looking finishing move, and then throws out Corbin. Mask comes off, the reveal of Kurt Angle. So Kurt Angle now in this World Cup. I think this serves a couple purposes. One, you obviously plant the seeds of Angle versus Corbin, and we'll see when that comes to fruition. Two, you get another big name over in Saudi Arabia, which again, it seems like that's what the Saudi Arabian people in charge want. They want stars from all throughout the years in WWE, and Kurt Angle certainly fits that bill. Was this the ideal way, in my estimation, to bring Kurt Angle back? No, I don't think you needed to go through this with the, the costume and everything. I think Kurt Angle could have just came back on his own. But I will give them credit. It is something that, while Kurt Angle is unadvertised, you're not going to bring in extra viewers that way. It is a nice little twist. So I could see both sides of why they decided to go this route. Again, it was fun for the people watching that segment. Hopefully not too many changed the channel when they first saw the setup of Corbin and a bunch of jobbers. But, we'll see what happens. I don't know if Kurt Angle is going to go back to being a regular in-ring competitor, but it certainly seems like it's going to build not only to a match in Saudi Arabia, but potentially some other ones to come with Baron Corbin. those were, I think, the biggest takeaways from Raw. And I want to switch over to SmackDown at this time as we continue here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I thought that SmackDown, to me, has been clearly the better show over the past 3 months, if not even longer than that. But this week, I thought that the show came up a little short, and they, much like Raw, seemed like they tried to do some things to increase ratings, to bring some new eyes to the show. And I think that fell a little bit flat as opposed to Raw in that regard. SmackDown has enough talent there that I don't think they need to do things like bring back the Big Show, which is what they did, and we'll get to that momentarily. But with SmackDown 1000 next week, I was expecting more from this show. I was expecting some, really some massive announcements for what might happen next week. That didn't really happen. We're not getting a WWE title match between AJ Styles and Daniel Bryan. That's to come in, of course, Saudi Arabia, which is where they're having seemingly everything upcoming. We're not getting a women's title match. We actually had one on SmackDown, and now they're pushing that back to Evolution. Now, they did announce the return of Rey Mysterio, and that's, pretty cool because, a couple weeks ago, Mysterio signed a contract. It appears as though he's coming back as a full-time competitor, and he's going to be taking on Nakamura in a qualifying match for the World Cup. But again, I was expecting a lot more in terms of big matches being set up for next week. We know there's going to be big returns. I think The Undertaker's going to be there. Evolution, not the women's pay-per-view, but the group with Triple H, Ric Flair, Batista, and Randy Orton will reunite with, of course, Batista returning. That will be anticipated. But, I was expecting a little more out of SmackDown this week. One thing that I thought, had potential to be more of a long-term storyline, but now is sort of already pretty much culminated, is the Aiden English-Rusev angle, in which Aiden English was teasing what happened in Milwaukee. And they did an okay job last week, showing just a snippet of the clip that led some people to believe, maybe something did happen with Lana. They cut it short, so you knew that there was more to come. I thought that this might stretch out over, 2, 3, 4 weeks. But instead, they pretty much revealed everything on Tuesday night. They had the entire duration of the video, and while Aiden was trying to hold off on that, Lana came out and said, I hacked your system. I knew the password, so on and so forth. She shows the rest of the clip. Really, Lana was just saying thank you to Aiden English for everything he did for her and Rusev. And then Aiden got, a little aggressive, made a move on Lana. She rejected him and stormed out. So it kind of just comes across like Aiden's sort of a creep and desperate and pathetic to a degree. And it led to he and Rusev exchanging blows in the ring. Yeah, they're going to continue this probably until Crown Jewel, potentially in Saudi Arabia, or maybe even beyond that. But now a lot of the drama's gone. The reason that people were going to tune in to see what happened with Aiden English and Rusev has already been revealed. After Aiden teased it, he showed a little bit last week, and the rest of it came out this week. So from here on out, I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do creatively to keep this fresh and interesting, because I think naturally Aiden English is a guy that probably with a lot of the audience, he isn't a big enough name or a big enough personality at this point to really capture their interest, although I think he does a good job. He's certainly not a household name. So we'll see. It seems, though, this is headed towards Rusev and Lana victorious, and Aiden English probably being relegated to a sparingly used part of SmackDown Live. I hope that's not the case, but I think Justin Lowry indicated that was his belief a couple weeks ago, and after how it played out this Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it ultimately culminates. I mentioned on Raw the Ronda Rousey Nikki Bella match, I should say, that had been announced for Evolution. Well, we now know the big match from SmackDown. It'll be, once again, Becky Lynch and Charlotte. Now, this, while the stipulation of the last woman standing is pretty cool, and as you can see here, Charlotte actually speared Becky through the entranceway, and it was a pretty cool visual. And actually, Charlotte got cut on her arm. Apparently, nothing serious, but it was pretty cool the way it unfolded. And it makes sense to use that to build to a last woman standing. The issue I have, however, is we've seen these two so many times over the past 2 months. It's reminiscent of AJ Styles and Nakamura, where they wrestled 5 times in a span of 2.5 months, to the point where the last time around you were sick of seeing the match. I think that AJ and Joe had the potential to go down that same path, although they have concluded that feud, it appears, and each of those two have moved on, so it never really got to the point where it was just too much of the same match. But I think that Becky and Charlotte, you're getting dangerously close, because they had the match initially at SummerSlam. Of course, Carmella was in that one. Charlotte won, and then they had the one-on-one match. Becky won. Then they had basically the third time around in Melbourne, Australia, ended without a clean winner. And that's the case again this fourth time around. This one ended in a double countout, which of course the fans there weren't happy, but you do that to extend the feud. But now you're getting the 5th time that these two have wrestled since SummerSlam, and to me, as good as this feud has been, that's just too much. You can only see, I think if you have 5 matches over the span of maybe 4 months, something like that, it works. But why are you giving away matches on free TV, especially if you wanted to have the title match? I think you save it for SmackDown 1000, but they didn't go that route. I really didn't think it was that good of a match. These two have had very good matches, but I didn't think on Tuesday was particularly their best effort. There was some sloppiness early, but ultimately it ended in the way that it needed to continue this feud. So we'll see. Last Woman Standing. I think that one will be a good one. I just hope the fans are as invested in that match as they have been this entire time throughout. Last thing I wanted to touch on in SmackDown, I mentioned already the return of the Big Show. Sort of came out of nowhere, because the Big Show, he does a lot of good things, even considering his age. He can still work a match. He still, is an interesting character that people care about just because he, of his stature, of his legacy in this industry. But just having him pop up randomly here and there doesn't make a lot of sense. Why is he on SmackDown? No explanation there. Why is he in a qualifying match for this World Cup? No one knows. And then Randy Orton defeats him, and it was an okay match. I mean, probably about the best you could ask for with those two involved. Again, they're both now in their 40s, and especially Big Show in his later 40s, with a lot of injuries over the course of his career. He was out for almost a year because of, I believe, hip surgery, and then the rehabilitation to that. So the Big Show's back. I don't know if he's going to be around long term, but it just seems like a sort of a weird way to use him, because you put Randy Orton over. Randy Orton's a guy that doesn't really need put over by the Big Show. You'd maybe benefit from putting over one of your younger competitors, maybe for instance an Andrade Cien Almas. Would that match be pretty? Probably not. I don't know, but it just seems weird. If the Big Show's going to put someone over, why Randy Orton? So we'll see if he sticks around on the blue brand, what he might do in the weeks and months to come, or maybe he'll just kind of go by the wayside. I think he's a guy that does have some role in WWE. I don't want that to be as a every week in-ring competitor, but I don't know. I mean, right now they can use all the help they could get in terms of some big names, so that's probably a guy that, again, he will be featured, I would assume, over in Saudi Arabia, because that sort of fits the mold with the Kurt Angles, the Triple H, the Undertaker, Kane, Shawn Michaels, and all of the other big and truthfully older names that are going to be over there. There's speculation maybe Hulk Hogan even will be over there. Of course, it's only the men. We know that, because no women allowed over there on the show, and that's sort of, I guess, ironic that Evolution, the first ever all-women's pay-per-view, takes place at the end of October, and just a few days later, you get this men-only show in Saudi Arabia. Think what you want about that dynamic, but that's just the reality, because, again, WWE's doing what it needs to do to make a lot of money. So certainly you can understand that perspective of it, I suppose. Again, busy couple of weeks, so we'll see what's upcoming in future weeks. It seems like almost all of the energy still is being spent towards building up this Crown Jewel show. That was the primary focus of Raw and SmackDown. At least we finally are seeing some development with Evolution, but for all the talk when the announcement was made a few months ago about this being the breakthrough first ever all-women's pay-per-view, it seems like an afterthought for way, way too long. We now have, I believe, if I'm correct, 3 matches set in stone, with Nikki Bella and Ronda Rousey for the Raw women's title, SmackDown women's title, Last Woman Standing, Charlotte and Becky Lynch, and then a change. There was supposed to be initially 2 singles matches featuring superstars of years past, Trish against Alexa Bliss, Lita against Mickie James. I thought that Lita-Mickie James one in particular was a little peculiar because Mickey's really not used as a singles competitor at this point. She's sort of a tag-along for Alexa Bliss. So they do what's probably the logical combination and make it into a tag match. And I think this also has something to do with the fact that you have 2 women who don't wrestle really at all in Lita and Trish, and you have one that could potentially be very limited due to injury. That's at least a speculation with Alexa. So put everyone in there, probably have Mickie be the workhorse of the match and do the heavy lifting. But again, this is something that WWE needs to do a better job of starting this upcoming week, of building towards Evolution and making people really care about this pay-per-view. We'll see what happens. Again, we'll continue to discuss this in the weeks, the months to come, and I'll be interested to see Justin Lowry's input. Hopefully we can get him back on here next week. And also, I believe next week we're going to have a new segment. We'll see if Justin's on board, but if not, I'll kind of just force him anyway, called What Grinds My Gears, and it's sort of a paying respect in a sense to Peter Griffin, a Family Guy. But just one quick little thought that maybe something that perturbs Justin and myself in the world of professional wrestling. Might not be, a major storyline or something real significant, but maybe something little that we noticed this past week that, kind of just annoys us. Maybe a flaw in wrestling logic, which happens pretty regularly. That's about it for this edition. Again, you could check us out. Follow the Twitter handle, 5-Star Pod Wrestle. Try to do as much live tweeting as possible, Raw, Smackdown, pay-per-views, if we can. Again, schedules don't always permit, but for the most part we do that. You can also check out my Twitter handle, which you can see right there. And, of course, Justin Lowry's as well, that we always post when he's on the show. And more importantly, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel. We have all the old videos dating back to March each and every week on there, and we certainly appreciate the support, not only for the past shows, but the ones to come in the future as well. That's going to do it for this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Once again, Shawn Meyers, your host, signing off, reminding you to check in each and every week for another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.